Morning, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Review Board for National Register of Historic Places. For the record, today is February 10th, 2026. My name is Kate Solomonson, and I'm the chair of the review board. Our purpose this evening is to consider nominations to the National Register of Historic Places, a federal list of places deemed worthy of preservation. Tonight's meeting is a virtual meeting for everyone, and we're conducting it in a way that's consistent with the state of Minnesota's open meeting requirements. The meeting is open to the public. It's also being recorded, and the meeting announcement and related information are posted on the State Review Board webpage, managed by the State Historic Preservation Office, which you will hear me call SHPO. During the meeting, we want to make sure that everyone can hear presentations, the board's discussion, and public comments. So everyone, please remember to have your microphones muted when you are not speaking. And we'd appreciate it if you could have both microphones and cameras on when you are speaking. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce SHPO's staff. Here tonight are Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer Amy Spong, National Register of Architectural Historian Ginny Way, National Register Archaeologist David Mather, National Register Administrative Specialist Lillian Egner, and Communication and Grants Manager John Disher, who's working his WebEx magic to make sure this meeting runs smoothly, which is much appreciated. The SHPO staff members oversee the nomination process. A nomination form was completed for each of the properties we'll consider tonight. SHPO staff have notified the owners of nominated properties about this meeting, as well as local officials and interested local groups. They also sent them a description of the National Register of Historic Places program and copies of the National Register criteria, which have been established by federal regulation. The board's only charge is to determine whether the nominated properties meet these criteria. So I'd like to turn now to any updates that SHPO, that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, Amy Spong, might have. Amy?
Great. Thank you, Chair Solomonson. Well, I'd like to take an opportunity to welcome everyone who's in attendance at this meeting and members of the public. If you've joined before or this is new for you, we want to welcome you to this discussion and agenda. It's a fairly full agenda tonight. And Ginny Way has all of the presentations, so we're going to cheer her on as we keep the momentum going. I do have a few announcements in usual form. We like to introduce recent listings to the National Register, and we've had two just in the last couple weeks. We've had the Grong Lutheran Church in Rolog and the LeSueur Public High School. You might remember that was a nomination that was a little unique to us in considering this last board meeting that we had. We've also had one removal or delisting from the National Register, and that is the Aaron Carlson Corporation factory in Minneapolis that sadly suffered a fire. That was being considered for tax credit rehabilitation and development. So a couple additional announcements. We do have a new member of our state review board. We have a new architectural historian who is not joining us tonight, but will be joining us. Their first meeting will be in our May board meeting. And the new member is Rosario Ramos Santos, whose day job is currently an architectural historian with the Army Corps of Engineers in the federal sector. So working in the local Region 5, I believe they call it the Region 5 office, but I could be wrong on that. But we'll be able to welcome Rosara on at our May board meeting. So we said goodbye at our last meeting to longtime serving board member Kristen Anderson, who, Jenny, correct me, I think she served for 20 years. Is that right? It seems like a really, really long time.
It was, yes, that was about right. I think it was 19 and a half, because she left a little before the end of her term this year. But
Yeah. So unfortunately, the last November meeting was her last one, so she's not with us tonight. But if you get a chance to run into her or reach out to her and thank her for that service, we're also sending a note to her and thanking her for that long time service, which is pretty unusual dedication to this process of the board. And then a couple additional internal announcements. We are currently in the process of posting and filling a new survey and inventory coordinator position in SHPO. This person also serves as our data manager for helping to maintain our statewide inventory, which is one of our responsibilities and requirements under the Federal National Historic Preservation Act. This position has been vacant for several months. And before that, the person in that role, Jim Crumray, had been on a long-term medical leave. So we're really anxious to be working on filling that position. I just wanted to let folks know we've been a little short-staffed in a couple key positions in our office for several months, and we're working on this year, I'm making it a priority to get a full complement of SHPO staff. So if we've been a little crazy pulling our hair out for the last several months, part of that is because we're all pitching in and doing a few other things with various program responsibilities that we've got. And then finally, we haven't done a press release on this yet, but you're one of the first to hear some really great news. Back in June of 2025, our office applied for an emergency supplemental disaster historic preservation fund, federal funding. It was a congressional appropriation that was based on a disaster declaration for the flood events of 2023 and 2024. And the flooding impacted 53 of 87 Minnesota counties. So very substantial impact. And we have just been awarded a little over $1.3 million to survey and inventory fairly large sections of the Minnesota River and the Roseau rivers up in the northern part of the state, about 80 miles of both the Minnesota River and the Roseau River, and the communities that are associated along the banks of those rivers. So we don't have a press release out yet. We haven't quite executed that grant agreement. It will be a 3-year federal grant agreement. It's going to be a huge effort, but we are looking forward to this project. It's going to add a lot of great information that will assist agencies like FEMA, DOT, anyone that is in, even the communities, in understanding what resources might be worthy of some additional consideration if they're impacted by flooding. So very exciting. We went high. We actually asked for 3.7 million, and we are super pleased that we're going to be getting 1.3 million. This type of supplemental emergency funding is typically been, the last several years, has been reserved for a lot of the coastal states that have been impacted by hurricanes. And flooding can be just as damaging and harmful to a lot of our historic and cultural resources along these riverbanks. So we're really excited, and more to come on that. But I wanted this board to be aware of this big survey effort and context development that will be coming forward. And let's see, I want to make sure I've missed everything, or I've gotten everything. One additional announcement, you may recall, I think it was our last November meeting, we've been trying to consider our May board meeting a hybrid meeting where we invite the entire board to come in person to St. Paul. It happens during Historic Preservation Month, Federal Historic Preservation Month. And we've been, working on planning maybe a retreat or a tour of some kind before the actual meeting. And then we would have our state review board meeting. We would still offer a hybrid option for the public and members if they could not make it. However, it's looking like a very light meeting, only two properties for review. So wanted to put it out there. We don't have to have an in-depth conversation about it tonight, but wanting to put it out there for the board to get some feedback for us of, should we just go with a fully hybrid meeting in May? Do we still want to try to get members in town for an in-person meeting where we'd have some kind of a tour? We could also push this to our August meeting if folks were interested in that. So we'd love to get your feedback. You don't necessarily have to provide us any input now, but please reach out to Lillian or Ginny or David if you've got some thoughts on that or a preference on that of moving forward with May or even in August is a possibility too. So looking forward to some feedback on that when you've got a chance. Okay.
Thanks very much, Amy. Does anybody else have any announcements you'd like to make? Among the SHPO staff, that is. I'm seeing it, heads shaking. So next what we'll do is introduce board members. So we'll do this by roll call, and board members will introduce themselves and state the position they fill on the board. Also, if any board members need to recuse themselves from a particular agenda item, this is the time to let us know. So I'd like to start with board member Gladhill.
Rick Gladhill, member at large, and apparently chief cat herder for the night.
Okay. Board member Levasseur.
Do not believe that Andrea has joined us yet.
All right. Board member Olson.
Hi, Steve Olson. I'm a professional civil engineer and a member at large on the board.
Thank you. Board member Sanders.
Board member Sanders, member at large.
Board member Schilke.
Hi, Chris Schulke. I am a member at large.
Board member Stark.
Hi, I'm John Stark. I'm a retired architect in the Twin Cities area and a historic architect on the board.
Board member Terrell.
Michelle Terrell. I am a cultural resource management consultant, historical archaeologist on the board.
Thank you. Board member White.
My name is Frank White, and I am a member at large and a historian.
And board member Worcester.
Mike Worcester. I'm with the Morrison County Historical Society in Little Falls, and I am on the board as a historian.
And I'm Kate Solomonson. I'm an architectural historian and emeritus professor of architectural history at the University of Minnesota School of Architecture. All right. Now, before we proceed with the nominations, we have one item of board business to take care of, and that's the approval of the minutes from the board meeting on May 20th, 25. Board members, are there any corrections to make? All
I'm
right.
sorry, board members, Chair Solomonson, did I hear you say we're approving the May minutes for 2025 or the November minutes for
Oh,
2025?
sorry, the November.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any concerns or corrections? All right, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Board Member Schulte, motion to approve
Second,
November minutes.
thank you. Is there a second?
Board Member White, second.
Okay, now we'll vote by roll call. Board Member Gladhill,
Aye.
Levasseur? No. Olson?
Aye.
Sanders?
Aye.
Schulke?
Aye.
Stark?
Aye.
Terrell?
Aye.
White?
Aye.
Worcester?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So the minutes have been approved. Thank you, everyone. And now we can move on to what you've all been waiting for, the presentation of the nominations. National Register architectural historian Ginny Way will present all of the nominations, as Amy mentioned, and she'll do this followed by a summary of any correspondence that has been received about each nomination. I'll then invite interested people to speak about the specific property. All right, nomination number 1 this evening is the Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Barrett, Grant County. And Ginny, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Chair Solomonson. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And while I'm doing that, I want to apologize to Linda Ray, who is on the meeting tonight. I am 95% sure I'm going to butcher at least one of these names, and I send you my sincere apologies before we begin. So our first nomination tonight is the Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Lean Township, Grant County. Linda Loreas Ray is the author. The Emmanuel Lutheran Church is located in rural Lean Township, 2.5 miles southwest of Barrett and Grant County. The property sits on approximately 4.8 acres and includes the church building and associated cemetery. On the left is a map of Lean Township with the church location circled in red. At right is the property with the boundary indicated by the red box. Due to shifting conditions in Norway at the time, nearly 78,000 Norwegians immigrated to the United States between 1825 and 1865, many of them settling in Minnesota. Immigrants brought their Lutheran faith with them to their new settlements, the most visible manifestation of which was the Lutheran Church. These buildings became the social and religious center of rural communities throughout Minnesota. On the left, we see the church's west facade and south elevation with the cemetery beyond, camera facing northeast. At right are the charter and early members, and they can be seen in front of the completed nave and bell tower in 1896 before the sacristy addition. In 1870, Lean Township was surveyed and opened for homesteading. In those first years, there was no organized church and services were held in congregants' homes. On May 6, 1872, 22 early settlers met at the home of Christian Anderson to discuss the urgent need to build a house of worship. They established a congregation known as the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Emmanuel Congregation. On the left is the north elevation, camera facing south. At right is the east elevation, camera facing west. In February of 1822, after land was donated by Old Lean, a building committee was formed to collect congregant subscriptions to pay for the construction of the church. Construction began after spring planting in 1883, with Ole Laraz most likely acting as the lead carpenter. At left, we see the west elevation, including the primary entrance and bell tower, camera facing east. At right is a view of the altar, camera facing east. The church was not designed by an architect and no record of a plan book has been found. However, several of the parishioners, including Laraz, grew up in the rural area of Stamnes, Norway. They were likely familiar with the new church built there in 1861 and seem to have designed the church in Barrett to imitate the familiar style. So at left is a view of the nave and chancel from the balcony, camera facing east, and at right is an exterior and interior of the Stamnes Church in Norway. The resulting structure reflects the traditional Norwegian long church style, adapted to the Minnesota prairie, and demonstrates how immigrants blended cultural continuity with the freedoms of their new environment. The unique property type was familiar to many colloquially. However, in 1863, article outlined some of the aspects that demonstrated the, quote, proper plan of the old Norwegian ecclesiastical style, end quote. At left is the floor plan of Emmanuel Lutheran Church. At right is the church in 1915, showing the original, taller, four-sided steeple with Gothic openings. Those aspects seen at Emmanuel Lutheran include the additive nature of the building design, the wide central aisle, a nave narrower than the chancel, with an arch at the ceiling to mark the transition, an altar surrounded by a railing and kneelers, and a balcony. The church also incorporates elements of the Gothic Revival style. At left is a view of the nave and balcony, camera facing east. At right is a detail of the pulpit, camera facing east. In January 1898, the balcony and the sacristy were added to the church. The balcony is accessed from the narthex. That same year, the altar area was raised by 6 inches, and the reredos and communication rail were built and installed. In 1900, it was noted that more than half of the foreign-born residents in Grant County were Norwegians. These immigrants carried with them a strong feeling of unity based on common origin and common religious conviction. Emmanuel Church, along with 3 other congregations in the area, formed a local parish. At left is the balcony, camera facing north. At right is a view of the sacristy, camera facing south. In 1899, the Ladies' Aid purchased an altar painting by noted Norwegian altar painter Sarah Rogland entitled Jesus' Ascension. In May of 1927, the young people of the congregation asked permission to build a basement under the church. The addition was approved and completed the following year. This became the gathering place for dinners, wedding receptions, Sunday school, Luther League, and the Ladies' Aid meetings. At left is a detail of the altar, camera facing east. At center is a north window detail, camera facing south. At right is the vestibule staircase, camera facing northeast. In 1941, a fire destroyed the upper bell tower of the church. The following year, the tower was rebuilt and the interior of the Emmanuel Lutheran was updated, including installation of a product called New Wood, covering the walls and ceiling of the church. New stained glass windows were added in 1947 and in 1950. In 1998, Emmanuel Lutheran stopped hosting formal worship services, and the Emmanuel Cemetery Association assumed ownership of the building. In September of 2019, the Emmanuel Church Building Association began to lease and manage the structure. In the summer of 2020, the Building Association sponsored the rebuilding of the foundation, which was found to be failing. To facilitate its construction, the chimney and cistern were removed from the building. Additionally, the basement volume, underutilized for years, was filled in with sand. At left, the far left photo is of the steeple after the 1941 fire. At center is a photo of the church in 1950. And at right, we can see the original wood cladding exposed during the 2020 foundation construction. The period of significance for this property is 1883 to 1998. The level of significance is local. The National Register criteria are A and C. The areas of significance are architecture and ethnic history Norwegian. Criteria considerations are A and G. The period of significance begins in 1883 with the first phase of construction and ends in 1998 when religious services were ended. The significance of the property is derived from its architectural distinction. Thus, the church meets criterion consideration A, religious properties. Emmanuel Lutheran Church provides a historic backdrop for continuing cultural events. As the property most closely associated with the religious Norwegian ethnic traditions in Barrett, the property meets criterion consideration G, properties that have achieved significance within the last 50 years. The Emmanuel Lutheran Church is a significant example of Norwegian Lutheran ecclesiastical architecture in Lean Township, Minnesota. Additionally, the building continues to serve the community as a gathering place for occasional worship, baptisms, funerals, concerts, celebrations, reunions, and other specific Norwegian celebrations. For these reasons, the Emmanuel Lutheran Church is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. There is one piece of correspondence related to this nomination. In a letter dated January 30th, 2026, Patricia Benson, the director for the Grant County Historical Society, writes that the organization supports the nomination.
Thank you, Ginny. Now we have time for public comments. If you should want to speak, please use the chat function to let us know. But if that doesn't work for you, it's fine to raise your hand. And also, if you do use chat, please don't use it for any other purpose than indicating that you would like to speak. Is there anyone who would like to speak here? All right. Well, we can now turn to the board's evaluation of the nomination. So board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination?
All right, Board Member Schuelke, I would like to offer that motion.
To recommend that the deputy.
Recommend that I don't have the wording exactly, but I'm recommending that this nomination be considered for the National Register.
Thank you. So, and this is to the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for approval. Thank you.
It is.
Great. Is there a second?
Board Member Worcester will second.
Thank you very much. So, are there any comments or questions from the board?
Board Member Stark, how can we help you?
The Board Member Stark here. We've had a number of Norwegian Lutheran churches that have come up in the recent years, and this one is a very elegant, very simple, well-preserved, well-loved, you can tell by the looks of it, church. When I saw that it had the basement infilled with sand, as an architect, my only hope is that they put a vapor barrier in there, that it would keep it from having moisture coming up and damaging it. But other than that, I really hope to see this stay around for a long time and the community to be able to enjoy it. So it's definitely worthy of being on the National Register.
Any other comments? Yes. Let's see.
Board Member Worcester?
Thank you.
Yes.
You're doing a
So,
lot.
Yep. I'm just trying to make sure I'm squaring the period of significance coming up to 1998.
Yep.
Is that strictly because that's when it was actually used as an operating operating house of worship versus when the last, say, construction work was done on it and whatnot?
Correct. So the period of significance in this case is more closely associated with its significance under criterion A than under criterion C. It's not limited to that.
All right. Thank you.
Of course.
This is Board Member Gladhill with a related question to that.
Certainly.
I love this nomination. It's a beautiful church. I struggle a little bit with criteria G. In terms of significance in the last 50 years, while it continues to maintain activities and elements that relate to its Norwegian heritage. I don't see that as substantial or new that I would normally see in, say, a piece of mid-century modern architecture or elements, and I'd like to know a little more why that criteria was pursued.
The criterion consideration G was pursued because active worship took place in the space until 1998. So the congregation, which was utilizing the space historically, continued to do so through 1998. We did not pursue the period of significance after that when Norwegian cultural heritage activities continued, but without the actual worship. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Thank you.
Yes, Board Member Terrell.
I made the same comment on one of our previous Norwegian churches at our last meeting, especially since we're doing criteria A and ethnic heritage. It'd be nice to maybe add a little language to an otherwise excellent nomination about Norwegian language services. When did when was the language go out of use in the congregation? Maybe a little bit more about the makeup of the family. Does it continue to be a largely Norwegian membership up until its 1998? Otherwise, excellent nomination.
Thank you. I will address those.
This is Board Member Gladhill again. I found myself with the same questions or thoughts, especially relating to what synod it relates to. I think that was touched on briefly, and there was a little bit of discussion about other churches in the area. I always find it fascinating when it refers to how that stands apart, maybe in membership or the synod.
Board Member Gladhill, I'd like to understand your question a little bit more. Are you asking that we discuss historically which synod the church was related to in more detail?
I think that would help or give a sense. It's got a great description. It's a very complicated description for a very simple church, and I think that the author handled that admirably. And it got a little bit lighter in section 8, whereas I wanted to understand the relationship of the congregation to the church. I think a little bit more of that would have helped with it. Again, it's not necessary per se with it, but I think that it would round out the nomination a little bit more.
Absolutely. And honestly, Linda provided a tremendous amount of information to our office with regard to that. So we may actually have it. And I may have erroneously struck it in an attempt to maintain brevity, but I can certainly find a better balance there.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? All right.
Just
Yep.
I think to answer that question, Board Member Gladhill, I was going through, 'cause I wanted to double check that, and I thought it referenced the Missouri Synod in there. Thought I saw that reference in a parenthetical in the application.
I will double check.
I think I saw a little bit about that, but then I wasn't sure with the parenthetical. And I think, again, I would bet that Jenny is correct in that most of that material is there, and that if it was just shaped a little bit, ever so slightly, that it would clarify it.
I guess my only, I'm sorry, may I?
Mhm.
I'm just curious how much referencing to which synod they belong to would make a difference in terms of the strength of the nomination, having grown up in one of many Norwegian Lutheran synods. There was quite a few. So I don't know. I'm just curious, how much more detail would we need along those lines, just out of curiosity? Okay. I believe there's a response in the chat, Madam Chair.
I noticed, yes, Madam Chair, Linda Ray, the author, says she can answer that question. I presume that's the synod question as opposed to the amount of detail question. Linda?
Yes, it was not a Missouri Synod church. It was always the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or the before it split, way back, the original Norwegian church. Mm-hmm.
Are you talking the ALC or the LCA? No, LCA was Swedish. ALC, American Lutheran Church?
Yeah, ALC. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
All right, other questions? And Ginny, I really appreciate you monitoring chat. So if there's nothing else anybody would like to ask about or say, I think we can go on to vote. So the motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So we'll vote by roll call. Beginning with Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
Levasseur. Okay. Board Member Olson.
Aye.
Sanders.
Aye.
Schulke.
Aye.
Stark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So thank you, everyone. Motion passed. And we're ready for nomination number 2, which is the Barrett Lakeside Pavilion in Barrett, Grant County. And again, Ginny will present.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. So this is the Barrett Lakeside Pavilion, Barrett, Grant County. Alexa McDowell of AK Consulting is the author. The Barrett Lakeside Pavilion is located on the south shoreline of Lake Barrett in Barrett, Minnesota. In the 1800s, generally public parks were popular for gathering spaces. The park pavilion structure quickly became a way to enhance the variety of uses available at the parks. Pavilions came in a variety of shapes and sizes, but they typically began as wooden structures that were often later enlarged to include kitchens, dining rooms, and additional floor space. On the left, we see the property boundary with the pavilion itself directly in the center. And at right is a photograph of the pavilion in 1922. The existing Barrett Lakeside Pavilion, it was a previous pavilion in 1992. The existing Barrett Lakeside Pavilion was constructed in 1929 to replace the original 1894 pavilion. The site for the pavilion was specifically chosen by the city of Barrett to support the function of the pavilion, which was to provide shelter for residents to gather and enjoy time outdoors. At left is a view of the site with the pavilion in the background. The view is to the northeast. At right is again a view of the site with the pavilion in the background. The view is to the west. The pavilion exterior is defined by its simple form with Dutch gable roof and its wood cladding. The building is oriented with its length running along Lake Street and its primary entrance on the west. The south elevation is dominated by a band of openings that extend some 60 feet of the upper wall. The east elevation was altered in 2009 by the addition built to house an expanded stage and restrooms. The addition extends most of the full width of the building and is approximately 8 feet deep. However, the addition does not interfere with the historic roofline. At left is a view of the west facade and south elevation, view to the east. At right is the east and south elevations, specifically that addition that I was just discussing. In the foreground, view to the west. The facade houses the primary entrance, which is a double-wide recessed opening with a Tudor arch form. The facade was as well altered sometime before 1935 when the space for a bar and a kitchen was added. The alterations added approximately 8 feet to the length of the building. At left is the view of the west facade. Our view is to the east. At right is the pavilion shortly after construction in 1929. The wood shutters, which when open historically created the open-air feel indicative of a pavilion, were replaced by windows in 2005. The original fenestration pattern remains a strong horizontal element. At left are 2 photos of the replacement window installation in 2005. At right is a view of the south elevation, view to the northeast. A double-leaf multi-light door with side lights was installed near the center of the window band on the north side of the pavilion. The door provides access to a non-historic exterior wood deck. It is raised from grade on concrete footings with no direct access to the rear yard. At left is an undated photograph showing the pavilion. At right is the north elevation and west facade, camera facing southeast. In the far view, at the left-hand side of that upper right photograph, you can see the wooden deck that we were just discussing. The Barrett Pavilion provided a seasonal venue for the wide variety of purposes, including dancing, roller skating, church dinners, family gatherings, and graduations. Specifically, it provided a space for the Old Settlers reunion. It also hosted national performers, including band leader Lawrence Welk, Nashville star Ferlin Husky, and Minnesota-born Johnny Holm. At left is the east and north elevations, camera facing southwest. At right is a view of the stage, camera facing northeast. The interior of the Lakeside Pavilion is characterized by its open volume and the elements that define its historic function, namely the wooden floor, booth seating, and a stage. The ceiling of the main space, though camouflaged by decorative garland, is an exposed historic truss system. Seating around the dance floor includes a few original 1929 booths, as well as 1960 booths modeled after the original. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the pavilion at Barrett became widely known for Thursday night roller skating, bringing young people from towns as far away as Fergus Falls and Alexandria. At left is a view of the dance floor over the booths, camera facing northeast. At right, a view across the dance floor, camera looking northwest. Eventually, skating rinks were built in other communities, and along with the rise of other forms of entertainment, including movies, interest in roller skating at the pavilion waned and then ceased by the mid-1960s. Seasonal weekend dances at the Lakeside Pavilion gained in popularity in the 1980s, and the pavilion continues to serve Barrett today as a community gathering space. At left is the view of the original booths, camera facing southwest. At right is a view through the bullpen, camera facing east. Two non-historic, non-contributing structures are located on the site. An octagonal wood gazebo on a concrete pad is situated west of the pavilion, and a picnic shelter on a concrete pad is located some 30 feet east of the pavilion. Both were constructed in 1992. At left is a view of the gazebo, camera facing northwest. At right is a view of the picnic shelter, camera facing west. The period of significance for this property is 1929 to 1965. The level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is A. The areas of significance are architecture and entertainment and recreation. The period of significance is 1929 to 1965, marking the year the pavilion was placed in service. 2, when research indicates the prominence of the pavilion as an entertainment venue had come to an end. As a small town venue in a rural area, the Barrett Pavilion was an important resource for a county-wide audience interested in the variety of entertainment activities offered at the building. Furthermore, the property is a distinctive local example of the pavilion as a property type. For these reasons, the Barrett Lakeside Pavilion is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. There's one piece of correspondence related to this nomination. In a letter dated January 30th, 1926, Patricia Benson, the director for the Grant County Historical Society, writes that the organization supports the nomination.
Thank you. Now there's time for public comments. You can use the chat if you wish to speak or raise your hand. So Jenny, has anything shown up in the chat?
I am not seeing anything, Chair Solomonson.
All right. So we'll turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. Board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination?
Board Member
Support.
White would recommend that we approve, and I apologize, I don't know all of the words. Sorry. Help me.
I will help you. So are you making a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places? Is that correct?
Thank you. Those are my words. Thank you.
All of you, you'll find the words in an email that you would have received late this afternoon, in case that would help. So thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
This is Board Member Terrell.
Thank you. All right. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
I have a comment. I found it interesting that that one of the bands hired was Bessie Givens. Don't know where Bessie Givens and that colored band was from. My guess is from the cities, but all the way up in Barrett. And it's always interesting, how did they connect with them to come and play in Barrett, which was a little bit away. So.
Okay, Board Member Schilke, thank you.
Yes, so this nomination I really found interesting. I mean, because it hits kind of close to home in the Lakes Country with the pavilions and the lakeside pavilions and the bringing in of acts and roller skating and the old settlers reunion. I mean, it was truly a means of bringing people together. And there are very, very, very few. It's rare to have a pavilion like this left. So I'm appreciative that this is being saved, and Grant County Historical Society, is behind this. And although I will give just briefly, at the Leaf Lake Pavilion in Otter Tail County in 1963, Jerry Lee Lewis performed and almost caused a riot. So let's see if Barrett Pavilion can beat that. I don't think the locals quite understood Jerry Lee Lewis. So,
Any other comments or questions?
I see that Board Member Stark has his hand up, as does Board Member Worcester.
Thank you. Board Member Stark.
Hi, I had sent these comments to Ginny earlier today. I did it ahead of time because I always keep forgetting to do this. There were a few little things in there. I love seeing this pavilion being taken care of and in good shape because they really are disappearing, as Board Member Schulte had mentioned. There's lots of good memories that have been created here for communities. On page 6, there's a reference to a 1929 photo C figure 2 or figure 22. And I think they meant figure 2 because there is no figure 22. And there also is no figure 21. And that was on page 21. I didn't see that exist. So that would have to be added if they're trying to reference a photo.
They are not.
Yeah.
Oh, Ginny.
I know. I'm sorry. I appreciate your eyes on it.
Looking for photos. And what I was looking for was photos probably with the shutters on and open, because the reference to putting windows in place, it looks like they've got a stock window and then filled around it. It's sort of there, but just to reinforce that feeling, if there were shutters, that it has that same appearance. The long shot and from a distance, these photos work with it. An east or west historic photo maybe would be helpful.
I will reach out to the author and see if there are any additional historic photos available that we can use for that. Yes, we had long discussions about the integrity related to the fenestration, and I believe in one of the 2005 newspaper article photos, if you look at the very end, one of the shutters is still open.
Having that same feel or appearance is what I'm looking for. It's close, but it's not quite the same, but that's because it's a window. Then the last comment would be about the addition that's added on, and the 1935 falls within the historic period, so that would be right, and it's 8 feet on one side, and you can see that kind of did the same thing, and they did a nice job of that. But if it was in the plan as a color-coded area, that you would know that.
Okay.
Just for instance, that would help.
Yeah.
Oh, and the wood floor, I've never heard it called log cabin pattern, but I like that. It kind of fits in there. So it was a comment. You learn something every time.
I did Google that just in cases. Thank you. Board Member Worcester, I think, was still waiting.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Just to echo Board Member Schulte and Board Member Stark, yeah, there definitely are not many of these very classic, I want to call them jazz era ballrooms left in the state. There's actually been some funding given out from another agency to do some research and writing about ballrooms in southwestern Minnesota. I was on a committee where we gave that out, and I just did a quick search on the database of National Register sites in Minnesota, and unless I'm using the wrong terms, when I typed in pavilion or ballroom, nothing came up.
We do have a few that are listed in the National Register, I believe, that are part of larger districts.
That makes sense.
I believe
Okay.
they were considered as comparables at the very end of the nomination.
Okay,
But this is the
gotcha.
only one located next to a lake.
Yeah, it's so that standalone feature appealed to me, and I just hats off to the city of Barrett for keeping this up. You don't see many municipalities of that size willing to take on a structure like this and keep it as their own. So I hope if this is actually formally approved, they're able to use that nomination as a vehicle to secure funding to, in a building like that, you start to deal with mechanical and plumbing and all that, and it can add up pretty fast. So again, hats off to them and good luck.
All right. And I'll add just one little footnote here. I'll check on this, but the log cabin pattern for the flooring could be related to a quilt pattern. And so I'll just see about that. But that is very much a footnote. Marvelous nomination and fascinating building. So are we ready to vote? I think we are. All right. We'll begin with Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Sanders.
Aye.
Schilke.
Aye.
Stark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
All right. Motion passed. Thank you, everyone.
I'm sorry, Chair Solomonson, would you mind voting before we move forward?
Oh, I vote, of course. Thank you. Yes, I vote aye enthusiastically. So motion is passed. Motion passed. So I think we can move on to nomination number 3, which is Lincoln Park in Duluth, St. Louis County.
All right. Thank you, Chair Solomonson. As we said, this is Lincoln Park, Duluth, St. Louis County. The author is Charlene Royce. Located about 2 miles west of downtown Duluth, Lincoln Park is a long and narrow natural space that follows Miller Creek as it rapidly descends between Skyline Drive and West 3rd Streets. Lincoln Park Drive, the park's only vehicular access, traverses the park's entire length. Stairways facilitate pedestrian movement between the park and the higher residential neighborhoods surrounding it. Pedestrian and bicycle paths weave throughout the park. At left is a map of the park with the primary resources labeled. At right is a photo of the accessible asphalt walking trail through the southern part of the park, camera facing northeast. Lincoln Park Drive is designed for motorized vehicles, but is also used by bicycles and pedestrians. Pedestrian paths wind through the park, including a section of the Superior Hiking Trail. Some paths in the plateau are concrete and others are paved with asphalt, and a few were created or modified during the 2023 renovation to meet the standards for the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, most of the park's paths are informal and naturally surfaced. At left is a view of a typical trail along the east side of Miller Street. This segment is between 10th and 12th Streets, camera looking north. At right is a view of the south elevation of the 12th Street pedestrian bridge over Miller Creek, camera looking northwest. While the park's overall character is picturesque and informal, the section between West 14th and West 6th Streets is particularly steeply sloped and rustic, with irregular gabbro boulders forming waterfalls and rapids in the creek and defining its bank. In a 1911 report, the Board of Park Commissioners stated that, quote, "The ravine is so rich in beauty that little had to be done in the way of formal treatment," end quote. At left is a view of the 8th Street pedestrian bridge over Miller Creek, camera looking east. At right is a view of Miller Creek downstream, looking south from 8th Street pedestrian bridge, camera looking north. The northern section of the park is bisected by a substantial Lincoln Park Bridge at West 10th Street. Constructed in 1929, the bridge carries traffic above the park gorge. At left is a 1929 photo of the Lincoln Park Bridge. At right is a view of the south elevation of the bridge, camera looking northwest. Between West 6th and West 4th Streets, the landscape is relatively level and more open, with a concentration of facilities including historic stone pavilion, picnic shelters, tables, benches, play areas, sports fields, and parking. The grade drops again south of West 4th and is heavily vegetated, with the land becoming marshy before the creek passes under West 3rd Street. At left is a view of Miller Creek and the bridge carrying Lincoln Park Drive over the creek, camera looking north. At right is a view down Miller Creek from the west end of the bridge, camera looking southeast. Duluth stretches for approximately 26 miles along the western shore of the St. Louis River and Lake Superior. It attained its sprawling size by annexing adjacent communities in the last quarter of the 19th and the first decade of the 20th century. The areas flanking downtown are known as the west and east sides. Both hold residential and commercial development, but evolved differently, producing unique characteristics that remain evident today. The city's middle and upper classes generally lived on the east side. The west side had more industrial character. Residents were mostly working class, including a high proportion of recent immigrants from Scandinavia, Italy, and Slavic countries. At left is a view of Miller Creek and the southwest corner of Lincoln Park from 3rd Street, camera looking north. At right is a detail of a 1935 map with Lincoln and Chester Parks highlighted. The deep rivalry between East and West was a formative influence in Duluth's history. Park administrators sought from the outset to develop comparable facilities on each side. In 1888, the city established a board of park commissioners to implement an ambitious plan for parks throughout the city. With limited resources to carry out this vision, the board's efforts in the 1890s focused on Lincoln and Chester Parks. Lincoln Park is an area historically known as West Duluth. The surrounding neighborhood takes its name from the park. At left is a view of the 8th Street pedestrian bridge over Miller Creek, camera looking east. At right is a postcard of the park's artificial lake circa 1914. By the time Lincoln Park was formally dedicated in 1896, the park board had installed ponds, walkways, bridges, benches, and a small wood frame pavilion. The park was a popular destination from the start, drawing people from throughout the city to appreciate the natural beauty of the creek and its setting. They also enjoyed the city's first public skating rink in 1896 and the first official playground in 1908. At left is the Lincoln Park Drive within the park, camera looking southeast. At right is a view of the stairway and stone seating area at the west end of 8th Street pedestrian bridge, camera looking west. Lincoln Park gained a toboggan slide in 1927, joining the one in Chester Park that had been established earlier. Park staff erected the upper section of the Lincoln Park slide out of wood, and the community pitched in to form the lower section from snow. In December 1930, the park department built a small ski slide in Lincoln Park just below 9th Street. Here we see the 1931 Lincoln Park ski jump at left and the toboggan slide at right. The department also hosted summer concerts in the park in the late 1920s and early 1930s, reinforcing Lincoln Park's popularity. Lincoln Park counted just over 47,000 visitors during that time period. At left is Elephant Rock, camera looking southeast. At right is a view of Miller Creek and the 5th Street pedestrian bridge, camera looking southwest. Throughout its history, the Parks Department maintained the property and enhanced the user experience by providing benches, band shells, and infrastructure. In 1934, in partnership with the Civil Works Administration, construction began on a stone pavilion. The department's annual report showed the expenditure of $12,000 in that year for the project. The pavilion's slate roof was installed in 1935, and work on the plumbing finally accomplished in the fall of 1936. At top left is the pavilion under construction. Below that is the completed pavilion. Both photographs are taken in 1934. At right is the facade and northeast elevation of the stone pavilion, camera looking southwest. After World War II, the Parks Department constructed 2 skating rinks most winters, one for general use and one specifically for hockey. To keep children active in the summer, the department and the Duluth Board of Education jointly initiated a program at 11 playgrounds. Over 50,000 children enrolled in 1949, including 9,640 at Lincoln Park, which claimed the largest attendance. Programming was expanded for teens in the 1950s and adults by the following decade. At left is a view from Lincoln Park Bridge with Lincoln Park Drive. To the right, Miller Creek in the center and the St. Louis River in the distance to show the difference in topography, camera looking south. At right is a view of the trail along Miller Creek and a stairway at the east end of the 8th Street pedestrian bridge, camera looking northeast. The park continued to be the scene of activity throughout the year. According to the 1986 annual report, the Lincoln Recreation Center was, quote, open in the winter and summer for 126 days, a total of 756 hours, for an average of 6 hours a day in the year 1986, end quote. At left is a view of the Stone Pavilion, picnic shelter, and playground from 26th Avenue, camera looking southeast. At right is the former quarry site on the west side of Lincoln Park Drive, camera looking northwest. The period of significance for this property is 1889 through 1975. The level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is A. The areas of significance are entertainment and recreation and community planning and development. The period of significance begins in 1896 when the park officially opened and ends in 1975 in conformance with the National Register's 50-year guidelines. The park continues to be a primary venue for entertainment and recreation to the local community. Lincoln Park is one of the community's first major parks, situated in the late 19th century neighborhood west of downtown Duluth. The park was the center of recreation throughout its development and remains a vibrant element of the neighborhood today. The creation of the park around a natural ravine influenced the development of both the West Side and Duluth Park system overall. For these reasons, Lincoln Park is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. There is no correspondence related to this nomination.
All right, thank you very much. Is there anybody who would like to speak to this nomination? Any public comments? All right, if there are no responses, we can move on to the board's evaluation of the nomination. So, board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination?
I would like to make a motion. This is Board Member Olson. It's got a pile of bridges in it. So I would like to make a motion to recommend the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
Is there a second?
Board Member Gladhill seconds.
Thank you. All right, so are there any comments or questions you'd like to make?
I just wanted to add that in the chat, Charlene Royce, the author, is available to answer any questions if needed.
Okay, I see Board Member Sanders has a hand up. You need to unmute yourself.
So work now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm really fascinated with this nomination because it's a cultural landscape that's been, it's culturally recognized, it's culturally enhanced and constructed. Is there language for this? Because this is different than a building in a sense. Or I mean, is there considerations for, you know, the sort of the cultural enhancement of a landscape on its own? I know it's described, but I'm fascinated with, you know, this nomination and thinking about how this landscape has been altered and recognized. And, you know, these are things that I'm interested in, this cultural landscape. So that's why I'm looking at it that way.
I love it.
But-
Yeah. So as I'm sure you noticed, the description is described in keeping with our, you know, the cultural landscape bulletin and the discussions that the National Park Service has around cultural landscapes. The boundary itself is considered a site, which is how the National Register approaches the idea of a landscape and a cultural landscape, whether it's enhanced by human hands or not. We do consider that a site is how we sort of encompass that in the count. I would turn to Charlene and ask a little bit if I'm not sure that any particular cultural group used this property in a way that the National Park Service requires in order for us to talk about ethnic heritage or cultural heritage. The new TCP bulletin makes very specific that the use of a property by a group of people that don't necessarily identify as a separate culture is not available to talk about a traditional cultural place. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, but I'm picking up what you're laying down. The National Register does, in fact, think about culture, and we're very excited about it, but it has to be rooted in place, and it has certain rules, and I'm not sure this meets the cultural rules. And now I'm going to talk to Charlene and see if she can say anything else about this.
Well, the park is really fascinating, and I've spent years studying it. And I mean, books could be written about it, and probably should be written about it. There's a little chapter in it's an excellent book on the Duluth Historic Parks, but that's encyclopedia covering all the parks in the system. So can't devote too much time to any particular one. This was important to a lot of ethnic communities. I think I mentioned the Swedish Midsummer's festivals that happened there for years and drew like 10,000 people, and the governor would come to speak. It was just a huge deal. And so there's a lot going on there. In terms of cultural landscapes, we did use the National Park Service's guide for cultural landscapes in defining the different features. But so much more that could be done. I guess it would be great if you got a way to study it more. That would be great. And I also must say that this nomination is a rare example of the city of Duluth, thinking that the National Register is a cool thing, and we're hoping that it encourages more. So I want to just really commend the city of Duluth for going ahead with this.
I see a lot of, even the Elephant Rock, which would be picked up on the American Indian community, the people indigenous to the area would have noticed that imagery. And there's other elements that I see in the landscape that would be culturally recognized from indigenous cultures. So it does have that element, and that's something that could be explored, as per potential, without doing archaeology without digging in the ground, kind of, where you're looking at the symbolic nature of just the environment around us. So be an interesting study, particularly that place, because you see people layering on. If one culture sees something symbolic in the landscape, other cultures do too. We pick up on those places, So anyway, it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And in fact, as part of the renovation work that was done five or so years ago, part of the mitigation for removing some stone walls was doing some interpretive planning. And so the Fond du Lac band to do interpretation. And one of the interpretive panels specifically talks about how this area kind of fit into their historical use. So I encourage you to go and hike around and find that panel. And it was really fun to work with them. And we used the Fond du Lac language for labeling a lot of things in that panel.
I like the idea of thinking about layers of history here, though, Tom. I think that that's really fascinating. With luck, we can do additional documentation at some point that talks about those cultural touchstones prior to the European use of the property.
Cool.
So
I'm done.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I don't have any more comments.
Oh, okay, good. Well, thank you all very much. And if there are no further comments, we can vote. So the motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register. Now we'll vote by roll call. Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Sanders.
Aye.
Schulke.
Aye.
Stark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
Solomonson. Aye. Thank you, everyone. The motion is passed. So nomination
Thank
number
you.
4, the Fox Auto Complex in Minneapolis, Hennepin County.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. All right, as we said, this is the Fox Auto Complex in Minneapolis, Hennepin County. Jacob Dahmer and Alex Hacker of AWH Architects are the authors. The Fox Auto Complex is located between 1621 and 1635 Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. The complex consists of 4 contributing buildings and 1 contributing alley, all of which sit on an approximately 1-acre site at the corner of Hennepin Avenue and Harmon Place in the Loring Park neighborhood. At left is the proposed National Register boundary map of the complex. At right is a 1951 Sanborn fire insurance map showing the complex shortly after the period of significance. Between 1911 and 1917, Fox constructed 4 architecturally distinctive buildings designed by Tyer, Chapman, and Bell. The complex introduced horizontally and vertically integrated systems of showrooms, service garages, and houses, an uncommon one-stop shop concept at the time. Here we see a site development diagram during the period of significance beginning in 1911, then 1912, 1916, and 1917. The design allowed customers to purchase, service, and accessorize vehicles in a single location, enhancing convenience and reinforcing Fox's reputation for innovation. The complex was praised as, quote, one of the finest examples of its kind in the United States, end quote. At left is the west elevation of 1625 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking east. At right is an undated photo of the complex showing all 4 buildings. Along the alley were entrances to automotive elevators that transported cars between floors and allowed customers to drive their product off the showroom floor and into repair shops. At left is the alley located behind 1621 to 1625 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking north. At right is the automotive elevator at the basement level of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera facing north. Each building followed the same general layout historically. The long rectangular floor plans span the entirety of the parcel. At the rear of each display room was a service garage tailored to each make and model of the display on the display floor. The variety of showrooms, each with their own street entrance, appealed to Fox Auto Company's wide selection of cars and to a broader spectrum of consumers. At left is the first floor of 1625 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking west. At right is the same area, camera looking north. All 3 showrooms were connected by automotive elevators, stairs, and interior doors, allowing customers to access the products and services across the buildings without going outside. At left is the west facade of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera facing east. At right is the west facade of 1629 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking east. Leslie Fox, founder of Fox Auto Company, transitioned from being a leading figure in the bicycle trade to reportedly becoming the Minneapolis's first gasoline automobile owner in 1899. He opened one of the city's first auto showrooms in 1901 and became a vocal advocate for automotive technology and infrastructure improvements. His early leadership in organizing contests, exhibitions, and trade boards positioned Fox as a pioneer who helped legitimize automobiles as safe and reliable, influencing public perception and accelerating adoption in the Midwest. At left is a view of the first floor of 1629 Hennepin Avenue looking east. At right, we see the first floor of 1629 Hennepin Avenue looking north at the interior access to the adjacent building. Fox Auto Company actively promoted the automobile through endurance runs, hill climbing contests, and cross-country tours, winning major competitions in 1911 and 1912 and earning national recognition. At left is an entrance detail of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking east. At right is the full facade of that particular building, camera also looking east. Fox also hosted and participated in auto exhibitions, including Minneapolis's Northwestern Automobile and Industrial Exposition, which in 1919 became the largest automotive show in the U.S. Fox Auto Company's leadership in these events reinforced its reputation as a regional powerhouse and a cultural influence in automotive commerce. At left is the southeast elevation of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking northwest. I'm sorry. Yes, at left is a 1920s photo of the Fox building on the corner of Hennepin Avenue and Harmon Place. Minneapolis car ownership surpassed the overall growth rate in Minnesota for the first decade of the 20th century. By 1911, residents of Minneapolis owned 20% of the state's automobiles. Hennepin County's expanding suburban areas and proximity to Lake Minnetonka's wealthy upper-class residents probably played key roles in the city's comparatively swift adoption of the technology. At left is the first floor automotive elevator of 1639 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking south. At right is a first floor hallway of the same building, camera looking southeast. In 1911, the Fox Automobile Company moved into their new headquarters. Service stations, auto repair, and part shops soon followed as Hennepin Avenue became Minneapolis's automobile row. By 1912, over 60 dealerships clustered near Hennepin Avenue. At left is 1913 photo of a Rambler in the Fox Auto Company's automobile showroom. At right is the first floor of the 1625 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking southeast. Fox's interconnected showrooms and service garages exemplified modern dealership design, featuring expansive display windows, integrated service areas, and fireproof construction. These innovations set a precedent for automotive architecture and positioned Fox as a model for other dealerships nationwide. At left is the northeast of elevation 1625 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking west. At right, we see the automotive elevator in the basement level of 1629 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking east. Vaughn Fox, son of Leslie Fox, became nationally famous as the youngest sales manager of a major auto house and secured the Oldsmobile dealership for the Northwest. His success in leveraging Oldsmobile's popularity and participating in national auto shows further cemented Fox Auto Company's influence. At left is the second floor of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking east. At right is the second floor corridor of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera looking southeast. Just some additional photos. Here at left is the north elevation of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, camera facing southeast. And at right is the east elevation of 1635 Hennepin Avenue, including the dead end alley located behind the building, camera facing northeast. In 1941, the Roycroft Company built an addition onto the north side of 1625 Hennepin. Today, the property is addressed at 1621 Hennepin. There remains internal connections between the historic building and the non-historic addition. At right is the west elevation of the addition, camera facing south. At left is the east elevation of the addition, camera facing northwest. The period of significance for this property is 1911 to 1931. The level of significance is state. The National Register criterion is A. The areas of significance are commerce and industry. The period of significance begins with initial construction and spans the length of time Fox had ownership of the buildings. The Fox Auto Complex is recognized as one of Minneapolis's most significant resources tied to the explosive growth of the automobile industry in the early 20th century. For this reason, Fox Auto Complex is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. There is one piece of correspondence related to this nomination. In a letter dated January 30th, 2026, Aaron Kay, a Minneapolis senior planner, writes that the Heritage Preservation Commission supports the nomination.
Thank you very much. Now we have some time for public comments. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Okay. We'll turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. Board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination?
Board Member Stark seems to have his hand up.
Thank you, Board Member Stark. Go ahead.
to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination of the listing in the National Register of Historic Places for the Fox Auto Complex.
Thank you. Is there a second? Would anybody like?
Board Member Schulke, second.
Thank you, Board Member Schulke. All right, so would you like to discuss this? Do you have any comments or questions?
I believe Board Member Stark has his hand up.
Thank you.
Hi, I was really happy to see this a series of buildings being nominated to the National Register. In the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to work in this building for almost a year, and I was at 643, which I think is a bridal shop now or something like that. We were doing high-end housing, and I was on loan from my MS&R at that time, and it was really a fun place to be. And I'm an old car nut too, and I've got 2 historic old cars. So this follows my preservation side of me as an architect. But the nomination, I would like to see it list where these cars were placed, where the different cars were, because there's the Oldsmobile, and we see photos of that in where Bartler Cot is. But the other buildings were specialized for each one with the service and everything in that area. So that includes like the Rio Speedwagon, the Cord, the Auburn, the Pierce Arrow, the Marmon, the Overland. And as a car nut, that's really important to me to know where it was.
So your question is if the research has narrowed down which building each of these particular car types was serviced in?
I think 1643, if I recall, was Pierce Arrow or Rio or something. I'm not really sure. The other side of it is these showrooms in those days, cars were new, and it was really, and these were high-end cars on some of this, that if there could be photos of something besides just 1635 of the front end, they had fancy floors and chandeliers and all that stuff, but just the space, the volume of it would be an interesting thing to see.
I would be happy to speak to the authors to see if they had any additional historic photos that came up during their research.
It's not necessarily historic, just current condition, just to show that this was the lobby, because there's the big storefront glass to be able to look in and see it. And if there is historic, to blend like you had shown on the historic one at the Rambler, and that's another brand that it wasn't Rambler, I don't think, at that time. But then the other part of it would be, what was the other thing I was going to say? In 1635, it was questioned if it was a historic mezzanine in there, and that's where Peter McDonald had his office, was up above there, and we were up there quite a bit. I believe it looked very original to me, but that's not showing up in the plan, the mezzanine section for that building, so that should be updated to match it as an existing condition, if not saying that it's historic. The stair comes up to it. There's windows up there. It'd be nice to see that part of it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just taking a note.
But it's a wonderful complex, and it has great history, and it's in a great neighborhood. So glad to see it being nominated.
Okay, Board Member Sanders. Board,
Yeah, it'd be nice to have an addition of the workshops there, the auto shops that were there, and kind of recognize the people who, the guys who are working in those shops. In this nomination, it all kind of surrounds the big shots of the corporation, but there were people who worked there, and I don't know if that's important, but I think it's important to remember all those the people who just. I'm fascinated with working with my hands, so
yep,
I think it would be an important addition.
I can speak to the authors to see what research came up regarding the types of people that may have worked in sort of the back of the house. If it's available to us, I don't think it would be a problem to, add something to that effect.
It'd be nice to have some photographs, some guys working or women working.
Wouldn't it be great? I love
Yeah.
if we could just request photographs from the ether. But yes, I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of that. I just think about how many hours I've spent looking for photographs I wish I had. I will talk to the authors to see if there's anything related. I should mention that this is a project that's going through the Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. So they did provide, to Board Member Stark's earlier comment, like 160 photographs for the part one. Which needed to be pared down for the evaluation, but I will go back through that document too to see if there are any additional historic photographs in addition to contemporary.
Along those lines, I keep imagining a photograph of people outside those huge windows gawking. I mean, they put everything on stage. It's a really fascinating building type. Does anyone else have any comments?
I see Board Member Gladhill has her hand raised.
Okay. Go ahead.
I agree with my fellow board members and with the comments from the Minneapolis HPC about just the enormity of this and how it takes on an incredibly complex and maze-like structure. That said, and I'll send on some notes, Jenny, some grammatical notes and things. The addresses in this are varying.
Yes.
Kind of dramatically in sections. Just even, the non-historic buildings, sometimes it's referred to as 1621, sometimes 1623. The addresses are a little bit all over the place. And I think it needs some clarification in that because it's such a complicated structure. It is dramatically difficult to kind of follow your way through it. And I understand that is endemic to this building, which is dramatically difficult to find your way through.
Go ahead. I can take credit for a little bit at least. I will share credit with the author for that confusing. Maybe we should split it 3 ways: me, the author, and the building itself. We during notification decided to reorient the addresses we had within the nomination to existing parcels as opposed to historic addresses. We had not realized it was different until we began looking at the notification letters. So I absolutely will look again at that. I appreciate people bringing that forward.
Yeah, I think it could be a good thing to clear up and kind of center because you find yourself buried in a lot of numbers. I had a question about just another picky element. At the time that this was submitted, Cafe Lurkat had just announced it was going to close, and it keeps on talking about currently Cafe Lurkat. I'm wondering if we could change that to formerly, just there's a lot of reference to it in the use of that, and it's been closed in September. So I think that could be helpful in orienting.
I did not know that. Thank you.
And I would love some clarification about the alley, which is everybody's favorite part of remembering days of yore of saxophonists sitting on little roofs playing and dining and all of those elements out there. The nomination refers to it as a structure rather than, say, infrastructure or site, and I'd love some clarification about why that path was chosen.
Sure. So the word structure to define that is based on the National Register descriptions of the categories. So a structure is something that is man-made as opposed to a site, which is typically something that is larger landscaped. Bridges and roads, railroads, all consider structures.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's just
it
a
was a
technical
little bit
term.
clarifying as being like an empty area, so that was confusing a little bit in that. There is one area too where it double states the replacement of the cobblestones, but again, I'll send those.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yep, I'm grateful for everybody's comments. Thank you. This was a not only a nomination, but a board packet where I got a lot of feedback, and I really do appreciate all of that.
All right. Any more hands up that
I do not see any. We can tag team this, Chair. We've all got a lot to do.
I think we can vote. The motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So now we'll vote by roll call, beginning with Board Member Gladhill,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Sanders,
Aye.
Schulke,
Aye.
Stark,
Aye.
Terrell,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Worcester,
Aye.
Solomonson. Aye. Thank you, everyone. Motion passed. All right, nomination number 5 on the New Ulm Commercial Historic District in Brown County. And this concerns a revised boundary.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. It's coming your way. All right, as we said, this is additional documentation and boundary revision for the New Ulm Commercial Historic District in New Ulm, Brown County. The New Ulm Commercial Historic District was added to the National Register in December of 2005. The district is locally significant under National Register Criterion A for its association with broad patterns of history in the area of commerce. It has a period of significance from 1861 to 1853. Here we see a map of the National Register boundaries of the district as it was listed in 2005. According to Title 36 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 60.15A1, a property is removed from the National Register of Historic Places when, quote, the property has ceased to meet the criteria for listing in the National Register because the qualities which caused it to be originally listed have been lost or destroyed, end quote. This is something we hear often and we'll hear later tonight when we remove a property from an individual property from the National Register. It also applies to buildings that contribute in districts. At the time of listing, George's Ballroom at 405 Center Street was considered a contributing building in the New Ulm Commercial Historic District. The property was demolished between December 2024 and March 2025. So on the left, you see the photograph from the listing in 2024, and at right, you see the parcel where after the ballroom's demolition. When it was added to the National Register, George's Ballroom retained the 7 aspects of integrity that applied to the district as a whole. The property retains integrity of association and setting. However, the demolition of the building reduces the location, design, workmanship, materials, and feeling, and the property can no longer contribute to the New Ulm Commercial Historic District. Okay, so typically, the process to remove a resource within a listed district from the National Register is accomplished through additional documentation completed by SHPO staff. However, because of where 405 Center Street parcel is located within the historic district, the National Park Service has requested we update the boundary of the district to remove the now vacant parcel. Because the additional documentation requires a boundary reduction, the documentation must be reviewed by the State Review Board. So at left is a map of the current boundaries of the district with the now vacant parcel in red, and at right is the proposed revised boundaries of the district outlined in red. That's the end of the formal presentation, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but I want to let y'all know that this is a very technical thing that you're seeing. So under most circumstances, when a contributing building either becomes non-contributing for any reason, meets those definitions of the regulations that I read, we simply send in additional documentation to the National Park Service to flip the contributing nature of the property. This happens on a regular basis for a lot of reasons, both moving from contributing to non-contributing and non-contributing to contributing. In this case, because the demolition of the property means we have sort of the boundary juts out to grab a now vacant parcel, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So the National Park Service wants us to clean up that boundary. So what we're asking of the board, what SHPO is requesting of the board, is that this documentation, the additional documentation, be forwarded to the National Park Service to address both the additional documentation as well as the revised boundary. This is like my jam, so we can talk about this nerd stuff in length. So please, Chair Solomonson, I'll hand it over to you, but
All
I'm
right.
here for questions.
Thank you. Is there any public comment about this?
We did not receive any correspondence. My apologies for not including that.
Sure. All right, I think we can turn to the board's evaluation of the nomination. May I have a motion regarding the nomination? And the language needs to be tweaked so that this is about the boundary reduction.
This is Board Member Gladhill. I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the additional documentation and boundary reduction for the New Ulm Commercial Historic District.
Thank you. Second?
This is Board Member Terrell. I'll second.
Thank you very much. So, any discussion, comments, or questions?
I find it incredibly telling that we voted on a historic pavilion and dance space earlier in the meeting, and now we're having to vote on losing one.
Yes, alas. So the motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the additional documentation and boundary reduction for the New Ulm Commercial District.
And just, I'm sorry to interrupt, Chair Solomonson.
Yes.
Board Member Olson had his hand raised. He lowered it.
Oh.
Perhaps he's content to not speak. I don't know.
Board Member Olson, please speak up.
Well, I heard that administratively there are changes to contributing, non-contributing elements in a historic district. And I'm just curious internally, is there a threshold where you sort of internally say we've lost too many and we need to rethink the entire district?
Yes, we do. So every time a property is, every time the contributing nature of a property within a resource within a district is flipped, the State Historic Preservation Office takes a look at the property in its entirety to ensure that it still has integrity overall. It does. I feel like I owe y'all an explanation about why I don't bring those to you. I'm not legally obligated, which is not why I don't bring them to you, but I wanted to let you know that I'm not. The regulations state that the State Review Board needs to approve any boundary change in the National Register nomination. That's the creation of a boundary, the increase or the decrease of a boundary. The Minnesota SHPO also brings substantive changes to the State Historic Preservation Review Board. So we will bring changes in period of significance, changes in criterion, changes in area. And that is so that we are sure that our opinion is supported by y'all and that you have an opportunity to discuss it. We feel like that's very important. However, it's not technically necessary. And that's why we don't bring contributing, non-contributing discussions to you generally. If we get to the point where the boundary needs to be reduced in any way, we will bring it to you. This is the first time this has happened to me. I'm sure that many of you may have seen it from Dennis prior to my, or Susan even prior to my being here. So this is how we're trying to balance the regulatory obligations without burdening you with the administrative work that we do every day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I may, I'll just add that, you know, we often kind of call that, what's that tipping point within a historic district of how much change or loss of historic character can a historic district handle? And these are the kinds of decisions we are being asked as staff to answer on a daily basis in our environmental review, Section 106, and then Minnesota consultation laws. And it's really hard because we're always just looking at that one change within a historic district or to a property. We don't know what's coming down the road, right? Next year or 3 years or 5 years or 20 years from now. So it is hard to be, you know, kind of ongoing commenting on changes that impact historic districts and properties. So, but that's the work that we do every day, making these calls.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Would you like me to reread the motion before you vote? I'm not seeing people nodding their heads, so I will go forth. Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Sanders, Schulke,
Aye.
Stark,
Aye.
Terrell,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Worcester,
Aye.
Solomonson, aye. Motion passed. All right. We now have a very different set for you for things being removed, proposed to be removed from the National Register. So Ginny, take us through it.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. All right, our first removal for the evening is the Daniel S. Piper House in Medford, Steele County. I do want to note on the documentation you received that the nature of the change for this property was listed as demolition. In reality, the nature of the change is partial collapse. I apologize for that oversight, and I will update that before it goes to the National Park Service, in addition to whatever edits and comments y'all have. According to Title 36 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 60.15A1, a property is removed from the National Register of Historic Places when, quote, the property has ceased to meet the criteria for listing in the National Register because the qualities which caused it to be originally listed have been lost or destroyed, end quote. Here we see a map of the National Register boundaries of the property with the Medford House in the top third. I'm sorry, the Piper House in the top third. When it was added to the National Register in 1975, the Daniel S. Piper House was listed for its significance as, quote, Minnesota's only known surviving example of an interconnected New England-style farmstead, where all the farm buildings, woodshed, summer kitchen, granary, barn, and farmhouse are constructed as one contiguous building, end quote. At the left, we see the property at the time of listing in 1975. At the right is the property in 2005 at the time of the removal request. When it was added to the National Register, the Daniel S. Piper House retained the 7 aspects of integrity. The property now retains integrity of location and setting. However, the collapse of the barn diminishes the design, workmanship, materials, feeling, and association of the property. While much of the building remains intact, the property cannot convey its historic significance as an integrated, connected structure without the barn. Because it has lost the historic qualities that made it eligible for listing, the property must be removed from the National Register. There's no correspondence related to this property.
Now we have time for public comments. If you wish to speak, raise your hand or put your request in the chat.
I believe we may have Senator Jasinski available. I don't know. There he is.
Yes. Thank you. Senator, would you like to speak?
Trying to get turned on. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Senator Jasinski. I represent District 19, which includes the city of Medford. I've been asked by the city of Medford mayor as well as the city administrator to be present for this meeting. Obviously, the condition of the building is sad, but it is in a condition where it just cannot be maintained. So the city of Medford is asking to be taking off the registry and so that they can do some work with it. It's very bad shape. It collapsed due to, I believe, a snow load at one time. It's infested with lots of bad animals and is really a detriment to the city. So they're asking it to be removed so that something can be done with the property. So that's all I have. Our city administrator is on the line as well if there's any questions, but I think it's fairly straightforward. So thank you, Chair Solomonson, and ask for your approval.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right, we can turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. May I have a motion regarding this nomination with the language tweaked to be appropriate for this one?
I see that Board Member Olson has his hand raised.
Thank you. Board Member Olson, please go ahead.
I would like to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer ask to remove the nomination from listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Board Member Worcester seconds.
Thank you very much. So discussion.
I see the board member Stark has his hand raised.
Thank you.
I'm really sad to see this happen. I've driven by this site for 50 plus years on my way home to my hometown of Owatonna on the back old highway, as my dad used to call it. And always hoping for somebody to be able to fix it up. And demolition by neglect is one of the saddest ways for something to go. So really sad to see this go.
I'll second that. Any other comments? All right. The motion before the board is to recommend the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the removal from this property from the National Register of Historic Places. All right, let's vote by roll call. Board Member Gladhill.
Regretfully, aye.
Board Member Olson.
Aye.
Sanders.
Sadly, aye.
Schilke.
Aye.
Stark.
Sadly, aye.
Carroll.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
Solomonson. Aye. Thank you, everyone. Motion passed.
Thank you.
Chair Solomon, if I
Yes.
could just make a clarification on why that language, why we're asking for the reason for the removal to be modified to the collapse instead of demolition. Really, there's language in state law that in our environmental law in particular, Minnesota Environmental Policy Act requires a mandatory environmental assessment worksheet for the demolition of any structure that is listed on the National Register. And so the city did not actually demolish and remove the material. And so we just want to be really clear that, you know, the language change really is tied into what would be required of the city or the responsible government unit, if it's in the city or in the county, to do this environmental assessment worksheet. And so the delisting now will allow them to actually demolish the property without doing that environmental review that's required under state law. So I just wanted to make that clarification about one of the reasons why we want to make that reason change on the actual form that goes to the Park Service.
Thank you. Are you suggesting that there needs to be a change in the language of the motion?
Not at all.
Okay. All right. Great. So I think we can now move on to the Sabin S. Murdoch House in Murdoch, Swift County.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. This is the Sabin S. Murdoch House, Murdoch, Swift County. According to Title 36 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 60.15A1, a property is removed from the National Register of Historic Places when, quote, the property has ceased to meet the criteria for listing in the National Register because the qualities which caused it to originally be listed have been lost or destroyed, end quote. At left, we see a map of the National Register boundaries for this property. In red, the house can be seen inside the yellow circle. This is a map from 2023, my apologies. Built in 1878, the Sabin S. Murdoch House was listed as the, quote, historically and architecturally significant home of Sabin S. Murdoch, the proprietor of Murdoch, Minnesota, and represents the efforts of a single individual to conceive, found, and promote a rural Minnesota community, end quote. When it was added to the National Register, the Sabin S. Murdoch House retained the 7 aspects of integrity. The property retains integrity of setting, despite the encroaching new development and the conversion of the parcel to a park. However, location, design, workmanship, feeling, materials, and association were lost when the building was demolished. Because it has lost the historic qualities that made it eligible for listing, the property must be removed from the National Register. There is no correspondence related to this property. Here on the left, we see the property when it was listed in 1985, and at the right, where the gravel the gravel square is located just to the right of the road, that is the formal location of the property or of the resource. Thank you.
All right. Was there any correspondence related?
I'm sorry. No, there was no correspondence related to this.
All right. We can open our public comment period. Is there anyone who would like to speak? All right. We'll turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. Board members, excuse me, may I have a motion regarding the nomination?
I'm not going to kill two of them.
Oh,
I will make the motion if again you help me with the language.
I will help you with the language. Thank you for volunteering. All right. So why don't you make the motion in your language, and then I'll read it back to you to see if you approve it.
I make a motion that the Murdoch home be removed from the National Register.
All right, thank you. So I'll embellish that a bit. I would like to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the removal from the National Register of Historic Places. Do you approve that language?
I do. Thank you for repeating what I said.
Just have to make sure. So do we have a second?
I will second it to get the discussion going.
All right, let's have some discussion.
So, Amy, regarding your previous statement of the difference between collapse and demolition, we don't know that this was demolished, but I'm assuming it was. Perhaps I am incorrect. Did this need an EAW?
Yes, and I just, I'm reading in the form that Jenny filled out that in January of 2025, the city of Murdoch completed a mandatory environmental assessment worksheet for the complete demolition of the Murdoch house, and then the house was demolished in June of 2025.
As board member Terrell, my question was ShipOS to comment on that EAW?
We were.
We are on the distribution list for every EAW, whether it's impacting a National State Register site. I will say though that during COVID and times where we have a really big workload and capacity is tough, we do not comment on every EAW. We look for the ones that have state and national register listed properties and impacts. And so we might miss properties that are eligible for or have some significance that maybe hasn't been fully determined yet. And so there are times, and we have been getting a lot of Section 106 and state level environmental reviews, and so our ability to comment, we commented last year on about 15 of them, and I don't know what the total kind of EAWs completed, but that's a snapshot. Usually about a dozen.
Yeah, I know that's a piece of your review process. I was just curious if there was a comment back to the city of Murdoch about this particular property.
Yeah, and usually we recommend, you know, some mitigation, or, you know, we'd make a comment that, you know, the loss of that would be an adverse effect. But it's not always 138, consultation isn't always required under 138.665. And so there really isn't, you know, the environmental assessment worksheet is really to determine environmental impacts, and then to make that responsible government unit then needs to make a decision to whether or not an environmental impact statement is required. So it's a very different, it's a very separate part of state law. It's not part of our, you know, preservation laws. So it isn't necessarily a protection element, but it's really, you know, forcing folks to take into consideration environmental effects to both natural and cultural and historic resources.
And Board Member Terrell, I can tell you that the National Register program became aware of it because our environmental review colleagues let us know that the action by the city had taken place. So we were following, our environmental review colleagues were following the process, and the demolition was confirmed, and so we were given the task of removing it from the National Register. And Chair Solomonson, I would like to revisit this a little bit after we've taken our vote and other business, if you wouldn't mind.
No, of course not.
Thank you.
Are we ready to take a vote? All right, the motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve removal from the National Register of Historic Places. So now we'll vote by roll call. Board Member Gladhill.
Again, sadly, aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Sanders.
Aye.
Schilke.
Aye.
Stark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
Solomonson, aye. Motion passed. Okay, Ginny, let's continue to talk about this.
Sure. And my question is really to the board with regard to how much information you want about where these National Register nominations come from and what their impacts might have been in other aspects of our office. I know that the board makeup is changing and everyone's experience with other aspects of our work is increasing. So I'm happy to give more background as we talk about these nominations. In the past, we have limited it to your role and responsibility, which is determining whether or not the property meets the criteria for listing. That is a national requirement. It comes under federal law. It has nothing to do with state law. So we have stayed pretty focused on that role and responsibility. However, if you find it useful to understand if the property was brought to you through a different program, I would be happy to accommodate that. I certainly don't want to keep information from you. It just tends to get real in the reads real fast. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you what you need to do your work and to pique your interest. So does anybody have a care, not care? They want to call me and talk about it in depth, because I will do that at a drop of a hat.
Well, I'm not a board member, but I always think it's interesting to know, because we do have, you know, this legacy amendment, which funds a lot of these National Register nominations. We have tax credit projects, which is an incentive to list these nominations. And, you know, personally, for me, I think it's interesting to kind of keep tabs or track of, you know, how does something come into our office? And we also have certified local government federal funds that communities can take advantage of for nominating properties to the National Register. So I'm always kind of coming from it from that perspective of, you know, all these different ways that the National Register program adds and subtracts properties, as we saw tonight.
Thank you. Are there any additional items of business?
Oh, I see that Board Member Worcester has his hand raised.
Great. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In the removal ones are always interesting to me because I'm curious, obviously, what happened. The institution I used to work for dealt with this when a tornado took out a barn in the early 90s. What do? Can't rebuild it. It's literally gone. And like in this case of this particular of this particular house, I kept saying, all right, well, who was the owner? Why was this allowed to happen? Did they follow procedure? And in our community here, in the last 2.5 years, we've dealt with two demolitions, one very contentious, which was not a registered property, but caused a lot of friction in the community and beyond. And it went through the procedures. Our HPC signed off on it. Our city signed off on it. And yet there was tremendous opposition to that demolition. And then we had another just up the road from me that barely anybody noticed. That was a state-owned property. And so I'm always curious how that path gets to that point of removal. Is it natural causes, aka a tornado? Is it ownership indifference? Is it just the nature of time? You know, and as Deputy Director Spong noted, yeah, there's funding that will help with this, but there's a lot of communities who just look at the potential barriers to accessing that funding and they just say, nah, not going to do it, not going to put ourselves through it. Especially some of these smaller communities like Murdoch, which may just simply say, we don't have the capacity to work with this. We don't want to have to pay somebody to deal with this. And there's no community support. So, you know, again, there's many avenues to get to that end, which we just dealt with here tonight twice.
And I'm happy to tell you about the process to as much as I know. Obviously, I do not know near as much as Deputy Spong about what goes on in other programs and program areas. So I will provide more information about where things come. I do so with a caution that your job as the State Review Board is to stay focused on whether or not that criterion, whether or not the property meets the criterion, whether or not it has sufficient integrity to convey that historic significance. I know that y'all are able to have information and also not let it sway how you're feeling, how you believe the criteria are met or not met, the eligibility criteria. So I request that you keep that in mind. I'm saying this poorly because it's late and I've talked far too long, but I would love to give you more information. I think what we do in our office is fascinating, and the interrelationship between the National Register program and the other regulatory and funding sources is incredible. And I want you to know how broad your work is. You know, I picked the National Register path because I like to be important, and we are absolutely the keystone in historic preservation. So I invite you to join me at the top of the arch, and I want you to know that your work is very important and it affects a lot of things. But I want to make sure that I'm not giving you more information than you actually care about.
Ginny, you're the keystone.
It's actually this way, isn't it? But that's okay. Yeah.
Hey, Jenny, just jumping in on that, I think we also forget that if there's a part 1 out there, it has a lot more information in it. And we don't get to see the part 1 usually because it's in the works at the same time as the nomination. So a lot of times we're making comments that for a nomination that would be included in a part 1.
That's true, but I want to remind you that the Part 1, while I see both the Part 1 and the National Register nomination, our counterparts at the National Park Service do not. So I love that that y'all are pointing out things that I may have read and just forgotten which document it is, and I apologize for my humanity. But the I think that it's really important that you know this. We used to tell you when it was a tax credit project before you voted, but I was afraid that it would influence you because if a Part 1's been approved, then I don't want you to assume that your comments and your thoughts about the nomination are not going to influence the outcome. Because just simply because a single reviewer at the tax credit program has already decided it's eligible. But
Thank you for that.
I think I'm just trying to, I don't know. I like you. I want you to know that your comments are important. That is all. And John, through the miraculous wonders of the Minship application and Lillian Egner, Part 1s are available fairly quickly after the National Park Service has approved them. So if you're curious if there is an accepted Part 1 and what might be in it, you can now use the Minship application to check.
Part 2's in there as well?
No. Talk about large files. Sorry. You'll have to do an information request for a Part 2, and you probably don't want to until it's done. So, yeah.
So I wanted to just say congratulations on that wonderful, enormous grant. And I look forward to hearing about what your next steps are.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. It's it's great. The 1.3 is more than what our annual operating federal amount is that we receive annually. We're at about 1.1 million or 1.2. So yeah, we've got some. We're going to be hiring some consultants. It's got to be done, and we have less than 3 years to do this project. So it's going to be a lot of work. Yeah, and Ginny and David were the main authors of this part of the grant application. So kudos to them. The team did a lot of work putting together an application, and it was at a time when our annual HPF operating money was frozen. And we got that last year 5 months later than what we normally would have. And while we were okay, there were other states that were really struggling, but we thought, let's put this application in, which will help support staff, you know, in case we don't get our annual federal operating money. But we did, so we're okay.
And I want to note that this is an interdisciplinary survey, so we'll be doing geomorphology as well as standing structure survey. So everyone will have something fun for them to look at, including maybe a bridge. Steve, I can't guarantee anything, but they have them up on the Roseau River. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you.
Rapidan.
Oh.
Why you, man?
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, everyone. If there is no more business to discuss, I can call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
This does not need seconding or a vote. This concludes the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Review Board meeting. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Great to see everybody.